All right, let's get started with this aging thing. Because we're not getting any younger as we just
As we observed, as we saw
as,
each other on Zoom this for the first time this week.
this time this week.
Yeah.
Yes. So we're continuing on from last week.
Yeah, last week we talked about aging ungracefully, right? That
Hmm.
wonderfully subversive behavior that defies gravity and never gives up.
Yeah.
So this week, we're going to talk about some of the things you can and can't do to slow down the aging process. And then we're going to answer the age-old question, how much is age and how much is inclination?
Right.
So without further ado,
Yeah.
let's start and talk about the top several things that happen to your body that make you old. What
Hmm.
are they, Sheila?
Well, as we discussed last week, we some of this is lifestyle related and some of it is age related. And the more we know, sort of the less we know how much is age related. But
It's a calendar.
definitely, yeah, definitely, our speed is and reaction time, those sort of things are peak when you're 20 to 30 ish. It's easier to build muscle mass when you're younger, but that doesn't mean you can't build it when you're older. Um, you know, things like how we store fat changes, though how much we store is up to us. So typically, especially, when women go through menopause, they tend to store more abdominal fat, which is more dangerous. But on the other hand, it doesn't make you store more fat. It just changes where it is. And then there's things like balance that people think are related to age, but balance is related to a number of things, not only muscle loss, but also vision and ear problems, and if you're on medications. So we could blame that on age, but there's too many factors in terms of balance as well. Although if you fall while you're older, the consequences are more severe, because if you haven't been looking after yourself, or your bones are less dense, then we know that falls are a really critical factor in terms of people going to the hospital, and then the slippery sort of slope to the end.
So all things being equal, speed, body composition, balance, these are all age influenced, right?
They are influenced. Yeah, they are influenced. And I sort of hesitate to say that, not because I don't believe it's true, but because I don't want people to use that as an excuse. You have a lot of control over some of the things that you do. It just may take longer, and you may have to work a little bit harder at it, but you can definitely make a difference regardless of age.
Are there other things that happen to you as you age? For instance, reaction time?
Yeah, that would be, that's sort of a related to speed. So agility, reaction time, those sort of things will slow maybe 1% per decade after 20s or 30s. It's not a lot, but
Right.
you might notice it, more, especially if you're not very active and then suddenly you go to do something. I'm sure that you would notice it more. I was looking at, the top 100-meter sprint times. And the men's record didn't break the 10-second barrier until 1999. And the difference between 1999 and 2009, so I just took 10 years in a row, was 1%. But if you were in the bottom 1% at, in 2009, if you had the winning time for 1999, you wouldn't have made it to the final. So, 1% when you're an elite athlete, which is, not that that's what we're talking about, but 1% can have a big impact depending on what you're comparing it to. So if you are a really, fast runner, or, a very good athlete, and suddenly you're 1% slower, you're going to notice it a lot more than someone who's recreational and just trying to stay active. The 1% is not going to make a big difference, because the 1% was, let me see if I can see it, 0.36 of a second.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but nobody here on this call is an elite athlete.
No, but I bring it up because we hear elite athletes talking about aging all the time and how they get slower and slower. And I'm like, well, you're not getting slower any faster than anyone else, but you are going to notice it significantly differently. So how you're measuring is different.
So what are what are some of the things we do that exacerbate the aging process?
You sit
That'll
me
get you dig your
down.
teeth into that.
Yeah, we spend too much time seated. Sedentary behavior is the worst thing that we can do. We go on diets. That's terrible for our muscle loss. We don't sleep. Sleep is critical for rebuilding muscle. So growth hormone, which is a muscle, which helps muscles repair and grow, is only released when we sleep. So losing sleep means we have less ability to repair. But really, it's our lifestyle. It's the sitting, and we have made many ways for us to sit longer and easier every day. We don't even, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to get out of your car to open your garage door. You don't have to do your dishes. You don't even have to vacuum if you have a Roomba.
Sounds as if we're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, though. If we get increasingly sedentary, we have a tendency to get increasingly obese because our food intake probably increases as opposed to decreases,
Yeah.
because you can't do a heck of a lot on the couch except for eat and watch. So how do you combat that without going on a diet?
Well, the first point about that is really interesting because, we think about, is it the load we have to move? So is that the problem that keeps people sedentary? Or is it our ability to move the load? So can we actually physically do it? And
Or
so if
both?
you're sedentary, you're going to have less muscle. So the load is going to be bigger, but also it's going to be harder to move that load. And I think we mentioned it last time. People standing in line to go up an escalator as opposed to just skipping up the stairs right beside it. So those people would get more out of going up the stairs. That would be active, that would be an activity of daily living. But maybe it's too hard for them. So we do sort of get into that vicious circle. So we don't want to go on a diet because we know that diets cause us to lose muscle, certainly lose muscle faster than we lose fat. And I just want to point out a couple of things. One, last week we had a question about a slide and I showed the wrong slide. So this is the perfect time. So this is the one that I showed. So this is someone before and after a diet. This is one I showed, not the one I wanted to, but you see that this person will have lost weight, but their legs, so through their thighs, probably about the same size, but what they've lost is muscle, not fat. They've gained fat. So when you're going on a diet as opposed to exercising and eating better, this is typically what happens is we burn our own muscle mass. We're storing fat because if we're starving ourselves, it must be a signal that there is no food. So we better keep our stores. So typically, this is what would happen if you went on a calorie restrictive diet to lose weight. So that's not very good because now we're increasing our risk for disease. It's harder for us to get around. We're going to feel older because now it's harder for us to do things. So the slide that I wanted to show you last week was this one, which is simply, the first one is a young man who has very little fat through his leg. The second one is a 66-year-old man who, takes about 3,000 steps a day, about 20 minutes a day. And they have some muscle, but you can see it's not really healthy looking muscle. There's fat in the muscle. So the muscle tissue is disrupted with
They're
fat.
well marbled.
Well marbled. So it's harder for this person to move because they have less muscle. But their muscle isn't as efficient as someone who's moving. And then the one beside is the same, a 66-year-old man, and he takes about 12,000 steps a day. And really, his muscle looks pretty healthy and there's quite a bit of it. So being active you know, that this is a, you know, a perfect example of how being active can change, you know, even if you weigh exactly the same, even if you didn't change your diet. So I would say that eating healthy becomes more and more important as you get older. However, it's never too early to start, because if you start earlier, it's easier to keep it than it is to get it, and it's easier to maintain it than it is to get it.
Not a lot of early starters here. They may have started early, but we're in the on the top of the hill anyway. If we're in that place, does it is it you know there's got to be some value to starting anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Doubt. So you can always build muscle. Yeah, and you know, we think about aging. You know, you think about diseases related to aging. We think about things like osteoporosis, for instance.
mm-hmm.
And
I'm losing you.
Osteoporosis, figures from 1995, cost us $16 billion. Us, I'm talking about American medical system in the United States. $16 billion cost from osteoporosis in 1 year. The direct of losing was 18.5 billion. All the things that we can't do because we can't physically do it cost us, and you know, healthcare costs are much greater than the osteoporosis cost, but nobody's talking about it. So you need to, you know, your muscles will build more slowly. The turnover and repair is more slow. You need to exercise more often. So what you might be able to have gotten away with when you were younger, you need to be a little more conscientious and do it, you know, if not every other day, then 3 times a week to see the increase in muscle tissue. But clear that these will improve your body composition.
So Myrna has a question. Her question is, hang on a sec here.
Could the 66-year-old
66-year-old 3,000 steps go to the other 66-year-old if the increased step count? I'm not sure what that means. Maybe we'll have to unmute Myrna.
Could you change from the lower body composition to the higher body composition? Yes, but you would have to do much more than just increase your steps. That would be, you know, now you're taking into account that you're already sort of behind. So you would definitely need to be doing strength training. Yeah, it wouldn't. Right. And you know that, I mean, that's another thing is that when we're looking at sort of elite athletes, and let's just say anybody who's participates in a sport right now can be considered an elite athlete, because it's the percent, it's not the speed that you're going. Age-related decline is somewhere about maybe 8%, 0.8% a year in men until they're 80, and then it might accelerate, and 1% a year in women. I don't know why they get to be until 75, but I'm guessing because they had less muscle to begin with. So if you're training, you should be able to maintain your speed. And when we're looking at the best 70-year-old male sprinters, they can run 400 meters in just under a minute. And the best 80-year-old sprinters can do it in about 70 seconds. So about 11 seconds difference. With 20 to 40% of the average men and women that are in that age group, 65 to 75, can't walk 500 meters. So it's not, yeah, the 500-meter sprinters aren't, you know, they're not superheroes. They're not anything special. They just didn't stop.
They just kept on going.
Yeah, no one told them to stop. They're like, why would I stop? So when we look at all of those, you know, the dramatic decreases in speed happen after 80. So is that a function of, I just don't want to do it anymore? Is that a function of it's too hard? Is that a function of age? I mean, I'm sure they're all wrapped up in there.
Well, yeah, it's once again, it's age versus inclination, right?
Mhm.
I wonder, I imagine there's no formula. It's a kind of a dynamic. But anyway, this broadcast is like a run. We've gone out, now we're coming back. So we've turned the corner and we're on our way home, and we've got the wind behind us. So
Love that.
we got optimum conditions. So we've talked about the things that are impediments to continued uh, good health and happiness, because I think good health becomes increasingly important for happiness as you grow older. And what are you've sort of touched on them, but let's see if we can do a little program for people who want to age gracelessly or ungracefully, and what are the top several, like three things that you can do to prevent loss of muscle mass, to increase your good,
Capacity,
yeah, capacity,
defy gravity.
and stop falling down.
Right. Well, you have to keep moving, number one. And by
Number
keeping,
one, that's number one, right?
yeah, make sure you keep moving. So whether it's taking the stairs when you go somewhere as opposed to waiting for the elevator,
Yeah.
or, making sure, I think many of the people on this call have a dog. A dog is a great way to get outside because you have to walk your dog. So walking, as much as you can, I would say, if you're walking, if you can walk 20 minutes, try to walk for 30 minutes. If you can walk 30 minutes, try to walk twice for 30 minutes. Doing some kind of strength training is critical, and the older you get, the more critical it becomes. So, every other day or 3 times a week. We need to recover. So sleep is critical. So getting a good night's sleep, or if you can't sleep, I know that everyone who's a sleep person says don't nap, but napping is a great recovery, but you're not going to get any benefits if you don't recover, and you may need to recover more as you get older. Because the decline isn't just about, physical change. It could be about our motivation. So we need to find a reason why we want to stay motivated. So maybe it goes from having your fastest, whatever, 5K to staying fit and active and defying gravity. And we know we're going to get a little bit slower. So that makes it even more important to keep our muscle mass, because that keeps our balance. And even people who've had a heart attack do better if they have more muscle, because their muscle is helping them push that blood back to their heart. So your heart works less hard the more muscle you have.
So hang on a second. The first we were talking about moving. Now we're talking about adding muscle. So can we just focus in on moving on adding muscle? How do you do that?
So you have to move.
Yeah. Well, okay,
They're
we're moving.
intrinsically linked.
Can you do more than move? More than take the dog for? Do you need to do more than take the dog for a walk?
If you have always been taking your dog for a walk, it's not going to be enough. You need to make some part of your activity harder and some part easier. So if you think that, that doesn't mean you have to run, but you could go upstairs, like you could go up a hill. You can make it harder in many ways, but moving, you could do 10 squats, when you're watching TV every time the commercials come on, or, there's all sorts of ways to add exercise into movement if you don't want to think about it as exercise. I think having dedicated exercise sessions is important, because you're more likely to focus on it and do it and put it in your schedule and get the benefits.
Okay, so if we're moving 3 times a week, are we exercising as well 3 times a week, or are we doing like 6 workouts
I would
a week?
consider it an activity. To exercise is a sort of spectrum. So don't be sedentary, be active. And at the best, you want to optimize, you need to exercise. So, what you can fit in, and that will depend on, your lifestyle and your ability and, what you have available, because none of us are going to the gym right now. But there's no way I would tell someone not to exercise, Paul.
No, I realize that. I'm just wondering how much, right?
Well, you can almost not do too much.
Right.
You can do an
So,
hour a day and be, get the optimum benefits. You can do 30 minutes a day and get the minimum. So, I mean, it depends on, what's important to you. You have to sweat. Sweating has nothing to do with exercise. So sweating is just your ability to release heat. So if you have more muscle, you'll sweat more. If you're dehydrated, you'll sweat less. So sweating and exercise are not, it's not a good measure. How little? That's hilarious.
how little? How little can I get away with?
I'd say at least 30 minutes a day. That's as little as you can get away with. You know, I want to know something interesting about reaction time. This is how little we know about the link between, is this age related, or is it lifestyle related, or is it, all sorts of other factors, is that people who have a higher education, people who've been to university, have faster reaction time than in any other age. If they compare them to people in their age group, you can predict that if you have a higher education, your reaction time is faster.
Oh, why is
Right.
that?
Well, maybe it's the connections, not the, yeah. So we know so little about, what is actually aging, because we used to just sweep people away. How can you increase your reaction time? You can do things that like play tennis or something. If you can't play tennis, you can do something where you have to react to something else that's unpredictable and obviously safe. So if you're walking your dog and there's a kid's playground and they have the hopscotch thing, you can try, doing things that force you to move quicker, side to side, forward and back. But
Catch a $20 bill that's dropped from a height.
yeah, kick a ball. Yeah, try to juggle. Juggling is a really, really low impact way to improve your brain connections and your reaction time, and anybody can do it. So video games aren't very good because you're not physically moving. Juggling is a much better way to do it. And yeah, try to catch your dog. So juggling is a really good way. So you can do it with like tennis balls or juggling balls or.
Go with one ball where it's easier.
So I took a juggling lesson from this man who teaches juggling to seniors. Because he does it for their balance and reaction time and their brain development. And he's also a cardiologist, so super interesting guy. So he had a good tip, because it's kind of, when you drop the balls, you have to chase them. So that's good exercise, that's good activity. But after a while, you're like, all I'm doing is chasing my juggling balls. I'm not actually juggling anything. So he said, well, do it over the bed or the couch so that you don't drop them as far, so you can get back to juggling. So it does work.
Oh, well, so what you're saying with this college educated data, which sounds really fascinating to me, is that it's cognitively related.
Mm-hmm.
Your physical well-being is related to your cognitive well-being. So how do you do the same things for your brain or different things?
Well, the more you exercise, the bigger your brain gets. So not only
Doesn't seem to work for me.
Well, you don't know what would have happened without exercise. So,
That's right.
you can't say
Pinhead
that.
fall, yeah, right.
If you're exercising aerobically, you tend to build new brain cells. We thought that we couldn't build new brain cells before. If you're doing strength training, you tend to improve the connections between, so the superhighways, so you get faster at connecting ideas. We get more blood flow to our brain, which we know is really important. Our prefrontal cortex, our CEO of our brain, is much more developed when we exercise. We're better at regulating mood. So everything that you do physically improves your brain health and makes it more likely that you're exercising. And now we think that maybe it's the other way around too, that we're not exercising because our brain has stopped, processing. So it used to be like, what does exercise do to our brain? But now we're thinking, well, maybe if people aren't exercising, it's actually because of our brain.
So if you manage to develop and maintain a consistent exercise regime, does that have an impact on your possibility of contracting dementia?
Yes, for sure.
We-
You're gonna,
you know, that's a
anytime
good
you
thing to end
improve the blood flow to your brain, you're improving your chances. So the three things, it's always three, but sleep, really important to clean out your brain every night. Exercise, really important to get the blood flow, to get, build new neurons, to build new connections, to increase, the size and areas of our brain and how they talk to each other. And then diet. So if you think that, if you're eating saturated fat, it's not just your heart arteries you're clogging up, it's your brain as well. So, the three keys of health: sleep, exercise, nutrition, they work for everything.
It sounds like a good note to end on.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Paul.
Unless there are any questions from the.
Yeah, anybody have any other
from the
questions?
floor?